What is going on there, mighty men of God? Welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, ballistics, the right way, with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. I am blessed to be your host today, to serve you in that way. First and foremost, I am a Christian. I'm blessed to have been a professional gunfighter most of my adult life. What does that mean? It means I am a Marine Corps combat veteran, infantry, urban warfare instructor for the Marine Corps. Also served in the Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Been blessed to win more shooting competitions than I can recall. Am working as a private security contractor and have worked for many federal government agencies I don't want to specify. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Psalm 144. With that, what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about 223 bolt-action rifles or 5.56 bolt-action rifles. I'm not going to get into the very subtle nuances of 223 and 5.56. Make sure your gun can fire your ammo. If you blow yourself or your gun up, it's your fault, not mine. Consider that your public service announcement for the day. Why in the world of affordable AR-15s that flood the market and many other semi-automatic 5.56, 223 rifles, why? Pray tell, why would one consider a bolt-action 223 rifle? Well, those semi-auto rifles have many advantages. There are a myriad of advantages or reasons why someone may choose a bolt-action 223. Now, this is a case for 223 bolt-actions, or we're going to discuss 223 bolt-actions. I'm not telling you they are just as good as, on a battlefield, a good semi-automatic AR-15, AR-15, M16, Mini 14, Scar 16. I'm not saying that. I'm not telling you to take those and throw them in the dumpster and run a bolt gun. That's not what I'm telling you. What I'm saying is we can look at them on their own merit. So let's get into it. Bolt action 5.56 223s. One of the reasons these are so intriguing is because 5.56 223, from now on I'm probably just going to say 223 unless I'm talking about a specific load. 223 is almost certainly, if you're in America, the most affordable center fire cartridge, period. If you want to go cheaper than that, you got to go rimfire. And there's a giant disparity of force difference between like 22 Magnum and 223. 223 is the most affordable centerfire rifle cartridge. So if you want an affordable centerfire rifle cartridge to shoot, 223 in America in 2024 is it. Also, because of economy of scale, because it is so ubiquitous, because it is so common, because of a little thing we like to call economy of scale, when you shoot small game, it can do a lot of damage on small targets, which is fine if you're shooting a prairie dog and you just want to eradicate it because they carry the black plague and fleas and do all kinds of damage. That's fine. However, if you're shooting something to eat it, like if in a survival situation, this is probably not legal, but let's say there's no restrictions. Let's say you're shooting a Eurasian collared dove, which is an invasive species, and you're shooting it to eat it. You probably don't want to shoot it with a 55-grain bullet going 3,000 feet a second, right? It's going to do a lot of damage. However, now you can't just take, if you're a reloader, you know this, but I don't want you to think you can just take any old powder, like Benchmark or something, and cut it down to a quarter of its weight and then expect a quarter of the velocity. That can be very dangerous. Make sure you know what you're doing. But with published data, with certain powders and certain reduced charges, you can load that 5.56 way down. Way down. To the point where it will not do a bunch of damage to your small game. So, that opens up more possibilities. Also, you can shoot very, very simple machines. You can make one in about 5 minutes. They're not hard to make. All it does is take that ejectamass, that hot powder that exits the end of the barrel, and instead of doing it all at once, it prolongs that. So instead of a sharp crack or a pop, it's just a puff. It's still kind of loud, but it's not nearly as loud. You can do the same thing with a long barrel and a, powder charge that almost completely burns out before the bullet exits the barrel. And if you hand load, you could do that with a heavy for caliber, reduced load 223, 5.56, without the need of a suppressor, without needing to fund the ATF to the tune of $200, without having to worry about crossing state lines and not having your paperwork or getting pulled over or whatever else. You could do that. And you could take small game without doing superfluous damage to the animal. Plenty enough power to kill it, but without all. So that opens up some real possibilities. And since we talked about the legality, the malum prohibitum of certain laws and certain jurisdictions, there are many places, sadly, in a country where the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, where it has in fact been infringed. And what I would tell you is move. Don't be in those places. What do you think? How much do you think they value you if they don't value your freedom? And what do you think that they're planning if they don't trust you to have a gun? Just consider, I would say the solution to that is move. But many people are like, I don't want to. I'd have to find a new job. I'd have to change my address with the post office. Whatever the reason is, you don't want to move. Many people will not move, or many people travel through those restrictive states or whatever. They go behind the Iron Curtain. Whatever the case is. These would be legal. And all 50 states where you can have a gun and travel with a gun, I'm not aware of anywhere that restricts a bolt-action rifle. It's about as mundane as you can get. So if you do live in such a municipality, you may consider one of these options. Now, the shot recovery time for the bolt action is not really that big a deal because you have to work the bolt anyway. So even with a 308, by the time you work the bolt, you can probably get back on target. So you kind of lose that advantage that you would get going from a full-powered rifle to an intermediate rifle cartridge in a bolt action. But what you do not lose is the amount of ammo that you can carry. So the same reason the military in days of yore decided to go from the 308 to the 223, one may also decide that they individually want to migrate from a 308 to a 223 because you can carry more ammo on you. And I don't care how strong you are, how big and bad you are, the more weight you add on somebody, the slower they are. That's just how math works, right? And just like in combat, just like in Iraq, ammunition is not the only thing that you're going to carry. It's not some romantic movie where you're just running around the woods with a rifle. You have other stuff. You need water purification. You need warm clothing. You need a change of clothing. You need changes of socks. You need a decent knife, usually a decent shelter. You need all those other things too. So there's a limit to however much ammo you can effectively carry before it starts becoming tactical to a crutch or a hindrance on your mobility. So let's say that that's, 50 pounds that you're going to carry in ammo. Like you're bugging out, you're going to carry 50 pounds of ammo, but you can carry a lot more with that 50 pounds in 5.56 or 223 than you can in .308 or many other calibers, right? In center fire, it's one of the lighter ones, and it's the most affordable lightweight one. There are other lighter weight rounds like the .22 long rifle, or you could even argue the 5.7 by .28, but it's quite a bit more expensive. So the 223 gives you that if you want that firepower versus mobility equation and you want to be able to carry more ammo. And that still transfers over whether you have an AR-15 or a bolt-action 223. Also, a more day-to-day practical use for a 223 bolt gun is training. It is, again, the most affordable centerfire rifle round that I'm aware of. So, if your go-to rifle is a .308 or, I hope not, but a .300 Win Mag, and you want to train with a similar rifle, and you don't want to go the .22 route, because I would advise everybody that's serious, that's into training, get a similar rifle and handgun in .22. But if you don't want to go that route, or you want an intermediate step, training with a 223 bolt gun can make you better with other bolt guns. So there is that advantage. We talked about legality and how many, sadly, semi-autos have been infringed upon by different levels of government. Well, there are other options, right? I know that the lever action has seen a bit of a renaissance, and forgive me, you may think this is heretical, but if you told me that I had to pick between a lever gun and a bolt gun and a similar caliber, I would pick the bolt gun. For the same reason the military, except for very, very small niche applications, never really used the lever gun. The ability to fire from a good low prone position, which I know you can do with the lever action, just it requires more, and that's a common battlefield position. I don't care how rugged and reliable and simple you think a lever action is, take apart a common lever action and a common bolt action, and you'll realize that the bolt action is a lot more rugged, a lot simpler, and a lot more forgiving of harsh environments, I think, if you get a good bolt gun. I know heresy, because lever guns are so hot right now, and every tactical tuber on the internet is telling you how cool tactical lever actions are. But there's a reason they were never mass adopted or considered for serious military service. I know the Russians used some in World War I. I'm aware of very niche application uses, but they were never a main issue battlefield infantry rifle. And they could have been. And I think there was good reason for that. And lever gun, or a 44 Magnum lever gun. They're good cartridges. They're good medium gain cartridges. They're good defense cartridges. They have a lot closer point blank range. You don't have to deal with that with a bolt gun in 223. And the ammunition is going to be lighter than both those aforementioned options. And you're going to get higher capacity depending on the bolt gun that you go with, and the ability to reload faster depending on the bolt gun that you go with. So those are some of the advantages, or some reasons you may consider a bolt gun in 223. Now let us do a little by the right flank and pivot to the next thing we're going to talk about, which is some different options. Not an inclusive list, not an all-inclusive list, but some kind of quasi-practical martial application defensive options in 223 bolt guns. Okay, so if we're talking about like a crossover kind of hunting, any kind of martial, and I'm trying to use the term martial more than tactical, because tactical has become so thrown around, it doesn't really mean anything. You go to Walmart and find some boots and they're like tactical boots. Like, what does that mean? Anyway, but martial, meaning like to use force on an opponent, an adversary, some kind of martial application. There you might be aware of the Scout rifle, which typically is in 308. That is like the de facto Scout rifle caliber, says Jeff Cooper, or said Jeff Cooper, Colonel U.S. Marine Corps, former. However, you may not be aware that there's a smaller subset genre lovingly referred to as the Cub Scout rifle concept, which is basically the Scout rifle concept, which is like this kind of concept, but in a smaller version, dubbed the Cub Scout, and generally in a 5.56, 223. So, if you can find one, I do believe that Ruger, which is my favorite Scout rifle so far, made a 223 version. I don't see it listed currently, but they do exist. I also believe that you can get the Steyr Scout rifle, a rifle I believe Jeff Cooper himself had a hand in. They make that same rifle in 5.56. Now, I don't know if he was around for the 5.56 version, but he was around for the development of the Steyr Scout rifle. It's a cool rifle. It holds a mag in the gun. It holds an extra mag in the buttstock. It has an integrated bipod. It's got iron sights. It's a cool rifle. So there's a couple options there if you want to go the Cub Scout route. There's also Scout rifle aficionados might vomit when I say it, but the Mossberg MVPs, or the Mossberg patrol rifles. They are very, very similar to this in the bolt action world. They're very affordable. They're very forgiving when it comes to the wallet. I've never owned one, but the Mossberg rifles, the bolt actions, are not horrible. I wouldn't say it's as good a quality as a Steyr or a Ruger M77 variant, but I would say if you're on a budget, it's worth considering. Many of these options will take AR magazines like the MVP. So you have that, a common affordable magazine. They come with iron sights, which sadly I think is a go or no-go for me for a fighting rifle. You know, call me old school, but even if I have an optic mounted, I want the ability to run that gun without an optic, meaning iron sights. All the ones I mentioned, they have iron sights. If you want the same kind of capability, but a more classic look, even though it's probably the newest one on the list, but it has a classic old world, just a kind of a classy walnut, it looks like a gun from days of yore, even though it's the newest one on the list. CZ. They make the CZ 600. I think it's the Lux. They make one with a beautiful wood stock. I don't know if it's walnut. A beautiful wood stock and iron sights. So that is also an option if you want one of these kind of crossover rifles. If you can find one, Remington, back when they made good rifles, used to make a Remington Model 7, which you may be familiar with the 700, the Remington Model 7, and usually when you look for it, you write out the word 7. You don't just put 7, you write it out, 7. The Remington Model 7 was like a shorter, handier version of that rifle. Well, they made the Remington Model 7 in a 223 with iron sights. So if you could find one of those and it's not crazy expensive, that also I think would fit into this category. Now, if you want to go the semi-custom route, you could take many, by all accounts, So those Skinner sights on those rifles is a very, very intriguing, affordable option, I think. Now, the other route is a semi-custom route. You could get pretty much most, right? You might not want to do this on a super pencil-thin barrel. I don't know a way to do it on a carbon fiber barrel. But for most bolt-action rifles, you could just get iron sights installed. You could have whatever version of iron sights that you want, and if I were doing this, I would want a peep sight probably. But you could get iron sights installed in, let's say, a Savage Axis. You may not want to go that route because getting that installed by a competent gunsmith, drilled and tapped and all that stuff, may cost you a significant portion of that rifle. But you could go that route, and you could do it with a a Savage Model 110, or you could do it with a Ruger Hawkeye stainless, or whatever you wanted to turn this into, right? You could do that on your own. Almost all rifles, it's going to be easier to go that route because most modern guns are drilled and tapped for scope. So you could do that. So you could also go that route and get, let's say a great one for this would be like a Winchester featherweight if they make it in 223 with iron sights installed, and then you could mount whatever optic you wanted on there. Now, I think if you're doing the crossover route, pretty much any good LPVO would be a good choice paired with iron sights. And I would want some kind of, not necessarily QD mounts, although those are a good option. You might just want to go with good optics mounts that you can remove without a tool. Because if you break your scope in the field, even if you have backup iron sights, if you need some kind of, T25 Torx bit and you don't have it, you can't get that scope off. So you may consider any kind of scope mount where you don't need a tool to get the scope off if you want to use your backup iron sights. Now, if you don't care about backup iron sights, or you don't care about any kind of martial use, any kind of fighting use for a 223 bolt gun, pretty much any modern 223 bolt gun that shoots decent is going to do the job for you. A 223 bolt gun is not a bad choice for a truck gun if you are mostly in the varmint application, like coyotes, woodchucks, rock chucks on a ranch, something like that. Defense is not really on your mind. If you need to use it for defense, obviously it'd be in your truck, so you could use it. But mostly you just want it for varmints. It's not a bad option for that. Now, again, I'm not telling you to throw away your AR-15 because nobody needs to carry a black rifle. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying this is the battlefield equivalent of a modern box-fed, shoulder-fired, semi-automatic, intermediate cartridge rifle. I'm not saying that at all. I'm also not saying that you should get a bolt gun in 223 versus 308. I would tend to go towards 308. I would. That doesn't mean that I'm so vain as to think that you should. If the 223 makes more sense for you in a bolt gun, then it's worth considering. And that was kind of the spirit of the episode. It's something worth considering. It's something that may fit a niche that you have. And if it does, then I would like to give you an informed episode on the topic of 223 bolt guns. Obviously, 223 bolt guns shine on varmint hunting. Now, there are arguably better cartridges like the 22-250, but they're going to cost a whole lot more to acquire ammunition for. So, varmint hunting is kind of a sweet spot because it was developed, if you don't know, from a 222 from a varmint cartridge from Jump. So it's a great varmint cartridge. So if you're just looking for a great coyote rifle, a bolt gun in 223 is a phenomenal option for that. If you want any of the other advantages, like you want a manually operated gun and you want to carry a lot of ammo, it makes sense for that. So there are some real-world applications for a 223 bolt gun. So just some things to consider there. Your tactical tip of the day, if you are choosing a modern 223 bolt gun, originally most 223 bolt guns had a much slower twist. The ammunition for especially 5.56 over the years has gotten heavier and heavier. From 36 grain to 45 grain to 55 grain. Now we're shooting 77 grains and heavier. Make sure if you're getting a bolt gun in 223 that you have the twist rate for the ammo that you want. Now, if you're only going to run 55 grain, most bolt action rifles and any twist rate that it comes with is going to handle that. But if you want to move up to the heavier grain bullets, make sure that twist rate is appropriate for that projectile. That's your tactical tip of the day. A very simple, very powerful verse from the book of Romans for the verse of the day. If God is for us, who is against us? Who did not spare his own Son, but delivered him over for us all, how will he not also with him freely give us all things? If God is for us, who can be against us? Just think about that. And a short sentence with powerful theological ramifications. So give it some thought. If God is for us, who can be against us? And you want God on your side, so make sure you're on the right side of the fight. Like it or not, you were born into a spiritual warfare that was raging long before you were born. And there's no sitting on the fence. You're on one side or the other. Make sure you're on the right side. If God is for us, who can be against us? Thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.